Today, we're not just explaining a concept, we're actually conducting a strategic deconstruction, a deep dive into a mechanism of power that operates right out in the open, but almost always goes unseen. We're going to expose what's known as the infrastructure trap, a system where the real control isn't about leadership or vision, but about quietly, methodically managing the very tools you need to do your job. Think of this as an audit of unseen influence, a look at the real wiring diagram of power that sits behind the official org chart. Let's get into it.
This quote, it just cuts right to the heart of what we're talking about. You see, true power, the actual ability to make things happen or stop them dead in their tracks, often has absolutely nothing to do with a job title. It's all about who controls access. And that's the core of the infrastructure trap. It's a subtle but incredibly powerful dynamic where your professional needs, the software, the budget, the data, get turned into a kind of currency for compliance. We're all taught to believe that progress is driven by our skill, by our ideas. But the hard reality in any complex system is that the person controlling the mandatory resources is the one who controls the team's reality. They don't just influence the work, they literally define the boundaries of what's even possible.
So here's our roadmap. First, we're going to identify the shadow hierarchy and the psychological state it creates, something called the petitioner reflex. Then we'll dissect the four-phase system used to engineer a dependency monopoly. From there, we'll dig into the deep-seated survival code in our own brains that makes this trap so effective. And after we've diagnosed the system, we'll lay out a precise three-step protocol to take back your agency, and finally, we'll distill it all down to the masterclass takeaway, how to truly own your outcome.
Okay, let's start with the invisible structure that really governs how work gets done. And I'm not talking about the official chain of command, who reports to whom. No, this is about the flow of essential resources, which dictates who really works for whom in practice. We are pulling back the curtain on the formal organization to show you the informal network where power actually lives. And as you're about to see, it is rarely where you think it is.
You know what's so powerful about this idea? It's brutal simplicity. Just for a second, forget about things like charisma or vision or even raw talent. Power, in its most basic operational form, is a clinical mechanism. It's about who holds the keys to the budget codes, who administers the software licenses, who signs off on equipment, who grants access to the database. That person, the controller of the infrastructure, they don't just influence what the team does, they define the very parameters of possibility. They're the ones setting the speed limit on innovation. They are quite literally the architects of the team's reality.
So, this control, it creates a very specific psychological state, one I'm sure we've all felt. You've got the skills, the plan is solid, the team is ready to go. But you're stuck. You are waiting for a password, an approval, a purchase order. This feeling of induced stagnation, this dependency on someone else's yes, triggers a powerful conditioned response that we call the petitioner reflex. It's that moment your professional momentum is forced to bow to an administrative process, and it teaches you a quiet but very clear lesson about where the real power is.
And here's the formal definition of the force at play. Infrastructure dominance. It isn't earned through being better or smarter, it's claimed by monopolizing access. It's a strategy that systematically turns colleagues into gatekeepers and high-performing professionals into supplicants, into people who have to ask for things. Every time you have to formally request a tool that is essential for your job, you are performing a subtle but really significant act of status submission. It reinforces the controller's authority, not based on their competence, but simply because they are the gatekeeper.
And this right here, this illustrates the central conflict that causes so much professional frustration. On the left, you've got the ideal, skill-based authority. This is the meritocracy we all believe in, that the best ideas, the deepest expertise, and the most talented people will naturally lead. It's the story we tell ourselves about how things should work. But then, on the right, you have the operational reality, infrastructure dominance. This form of power couldn't care less about your talent. It doesn't care how brilliant your idea is if you can't get the funding for it. And this disconnect is where all the friction is born. Your expertise screams go, but the system, controlled by someone else, whispers, wait for my permission.
The long-term fallout from this dynamic is just corrosive. First, your strategic agency, your ability to act decisively and on your own, it just starts to erode. You start second-guessing bold ideas, not because they're bad ideas, but based on the odds of getting them approved. This leads to a state of learned helplessness, where you and your team unconsciously start to shrink your ambitions to fit inside the box of what the gatekeeper will allow. This, of course, hands the controller all the leverage, and, critically, the mental energy you spend just navigating these gates creates a massive cognitive load. This isn't just an annoyance, it's a direct tax on your focus and creativity. It's energy that's being stolen from your real work. And over time, you start unconsciously accommodating the bottleneck, designing projects around the delay, accepting it as a fact of life instead of the system flaw that it is.
So, how is this system of control actually built? Well, it's rarely an accident. It's usually a deliberate four-phase process for building a monopoly on dependency. The best way to think about it is to picture the controller as the operator of a social dam. They strategically ration the flow of resources, the water, not to manage the resource itself, but to manage the emotional state and the compliance of the people downstream. They create these frustrating droughts, followed by floods of relief, literally tuning the nervous system of the team to their own rhythm.
Here's the leverage point. The entire system runs on a simple, self-reinforcing engine, the access approval loop. It's a feedback cycle designed to do one thing with ruthless efficiency: to signal the progress isn't a constant you can rely on, but a variable that the controller hands out at their discretion. Every time you enter the loop by asking, then you wait, and then you receive access, the system gets stronger. It's designed to keep you in a state of uncertainty, where the only path to certainty is by complying with the gatekeeper.
Let's walk through the actual blueprint for building this thing. Step 1 is critical node acquisition. The controller finds a single point of failure in the workflow: one server, one key software license, one budget, and they maneuver to get sole control over it. Step 2, they build the compliance gate. They basically invent complexity. New forms, complicated security protocols, unnecessary steps in the process. The point isn't security, it's to meter access and constantly remind you who's in charge. Step 3 is strategic occlusion. This is where they create a kind of magic filter. The controller uses jargon and technical mystique to make the resource seem impossibly complex, discouraging anyone from even trying to learn it themselves. Finally, step 4, conditional progress. This is where the trap closes. After you've jumped through all their hoops, the gate opens, and the resource flows. And that powerful surge of relief you feel, that's the reward. That's the psychological drug that conditions you to see the controller as the expert who solved your problem, not as the bottleneck who created it in the first place.
Okay, so now we understand the what and the how of this system. We've seen the architecture of the trap. But to really dismantle it, we have to understand the why. Why is this so devastatingly effective? Why do highly intelligent, capable people put up with it? Well, the answer isn't in some management textbook. It's coded directly into our biology, into the ancient survival programming of the human brain. I mean, just think about how absurd it is for a moment. Why does a world-class surgeon have to defer to a hospital administrator who controls the scheduling software? Why does a brilliant team of engineers hold back on a breakthrough because of a bureaucrat who controls the purchasing process? Rationally, it makes zero sense. Progress should not be held hostage by process. And yet, it happens every single day in every industry. The reason is that this whole dynamic bypasses our rational mind, and it targets something much deeper, something much more primal.
And the answer is a concept called biological loss aversion. See, for millions of years of evolution, losing your tools, your spear, your ability to make fire, your shelter, that was often a death sentence. So our brains are hardwired with this incredibly powerful threat detection system designed to protect our tools at all costs. In a modern world, when a gatekeeper threatens or delays our access to our tools, our software, our data, our funding, it doesn't just register as an inconvenience. It triggers this ancient primal system. Our subconscious brain doesn't see the difference between losing access to a server and losing our spear. It just registers threat to survival tools and pushes us toward instinctive compliance to make the threat go away.
And this primal fear of loss is then amplified by several psychological levers. First, the halo effect kicks in. We just unconsciously assume that the person managing this complex, critical system must be uniquely brilliant or indispensable. Second is the complexity trap, which we talked about. The controller actively uses mystique and jargon like a defensive moat to keep you dependent. Third, by providing intermittent access, sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow. The controller makes the resource feel unpredictable and therefore more scarce and valuable. It works just like a slot machine, making the eventual reward of access feel even more potent. And finally, all of this adds to your cognitive load, draining your mental reserves until just complying feels like the easiest path forward.
All right, so we have now fully deconstructed the trap. We see the system's architecture, and we understand the deep psychology it exploits. So now we shift from analysis to action. This section is all about a clear, strategic protocol for neutralizing this dynamic and reclaiming your professional autonomy. And this isn't about confrontation. It's about making the trap completely irrelevant.
The most critical shift you have to make is internal. You have to consciously stop seeing yourself as a petitioner, someone who asks for tools, and start seeing yourself as an architect, someone who designs outcomes. You see, a petitioner's core question is, may I have access? An architect's core question is, what is the most effective way to achieve this result? This is not just a word game, it's a fundamental reframing of your identity from dependent to sovereign. The actions we're about to discuss will only work once you've made this internal shift.
Okay, here is the 3-step counter strategy. First, system mapping. Awareness is the antidote. You need to formally map out and explicitly label every single point of failure and dependency bottleneck in your workflow. I mean it. Create a document, draw a diagram. The very act of naming it, this approval process is a dependency bottleneck, keeps your rational brain in charge and stops that learned helplessness from setting in. Second, build a shadow infrastructure. This is all about redundancy. You have to systematically build alternative pathways. Find open source tools, use personal subscriptions for non-sensitive work, cross-train your colleagues. When you have options, the gatekeeper's main source of leverage, their monopoly, just evaporates. Third, demand transparency. This is the strategic pivot. You shift the entire conversation. You stop asking, can I have access? And you start asking, how can we create a transparent protocol to automate access for the whole team? You reframe their control not as a position of authority, but as a system flaw, a bug that needs to be fixed for everyone's efficiency.
And for those of you in leadership positions, this knowledge can be used for good, to create the exact opposite effect. Instead of becoming a controller, your job should be to become a provider. You can build what we call flow-facilitated infrastructure. Your goal should be to use your control over resources to relentlessly remove friction, to empower your people, and to make access to tools seamless and abundant. True leadership in this context is measured by how quickly you can make yourself unnecessary to the day-to-day workflow.
We've covered a lot of ground here. We have dissected the system, we've diagnosed the psychology, and we've detailed the solution. So now, let's distill all of this down to the final, core strategic insight. This is the masterclass takeaway, the fundamental principle that governs this entire dynamic.
This is the entire dynamic captured in a single metaphor. Your talent, your vision, your work ethic, those things determine how well and how fast you can climb. But if you are waiting for someone else to provide the ladder, you are fundamentally not in control of your own ascent. You are a tenant in their system. Your potential will always be defined by their limits, their priorities, and their permission, not by your own. The goal is to stop being the climber asking for a ladder and start being the one who owns the ladder.
So let's summarize the whole framework one last time. The system we've deconstructed is the dependency monopoly, and it works through a self-reinforcing access approval loop. The psychology it exploits is our deep biological loss aversion, that primal fear of losing the tools we need to survive. And the solution, the way out, is a 2-part key. The first part is awareness, simply seeing the system for what it is. And the second part is strategic action, the disciplined practice of infrastructure diversification to build redundancy and make the gatekeeper's control totally irrelevant.
Ultimately, it all comes down to this. The person who owns the tools owns the outcome.